one of the challenges that the Fed has will be that there is they try to ease when the markets are already on fire. How do they keep doing that? And I know there are people saying, well, with all these issues that you and Dave are talking about, why is it that stocks are making new highs? And clearly the S&P and the NASDAQ are breaking out. And I've already said I'm a big fan of breakouts. I think there's some areas that we'll talk about at the end where the breakouts look a lot more investable, if you will. But when you see that we've had the fastest easing of financial conditions, it's not really a shock that the stock market has been acting so frothy. But what it's ignoring is a fairly significant backup in Treasury yields, and that really hasn't got the market's attention. That happened last summer too, and then once we got to 5%, all of a sudden the market hit the panic button. So bonds better stabilize soon. Now this also looks at liquidity. Now I believe this is actually for Michael. It is
Yeah.
Michael Howell, who you just mentioned. And what's interesting is that the liquidity has actually kind of flatlined. It's at a high level, but it's quit going up. And of all his charts that you forwarded me, I thought this was the most interesting because you're seeing that the S&P continues to go above that liquidity line, and it's never been as extended as it is now. It got that way kind of prior to COVID, and then crashed for obvious reasons. But and that I think that's a bit of a warning flag. And then of course we've got just super bullish sentiment right now. And obviously there is still a lot of liquidity in the market. The Fed is doing QT. And one of the interesting comments Powell made yesterday is that QT is going to be turned down, not off, but turned down, which means the Fed is actually still tightening right now. And even the Fed whisperer, Nick Timiraos, said that perhaps the Fed might be forced into a situation where they cut too soon. Again, getting back to the 1970s, that's what happened under Arthur Burns. You'd have a bit of an improvement in inflation, and the Fed would say, oh, great, we need to get interest rates down. And they cut too early, and then inflation took off again. And I guess what I was thinking about listening to Powell yesterday and reading some of the comments is what would, if we hadn't had these hot inflation numbers the last couple of months, and for anybody on this webinar that doesn't know that, it's been a series of really negative surprises, too hot inflation. What if it had been the other way around? If the inflation had been low, what would they have done? Would they have, cut it just regardless of how frothy the market is? And what do you think?
Me, yeah.
Do you think
Look,
they worry at all about creating a bubble? Is really what I'm saying. Do you think they haven't paid attention to the history of the prior bubbles that they've let inflate to gargantuan proportions?
Dave, Marco Papic, who's a Clock Tower Group now, fantastic geopolitical analyst, and great fun to go out for dinner with. He talks about a world of constraints and preferences, and it's one of these frameworks that once you hear it and you hear someone describe it, it changes the way you think about how to handicap the world. And what Marco says is everybody has preferences, things they want, things they would like to do, outcomes they desire, but they also have constraints. And we essentially live in a world of preferences that are bound by constraints. And I think this is exactly where the Fed now finds themselves. They have preferences. There are things they want. There are prints they need. There are courses of action that they want to take, and they have very, very clear preferences. And we are at the point of bumping up against the constraints that are going to actually force them to either take action, Dave, to either do things that go against their preferences in order to keep the lid on this, or as I said earlier, they're going to make decisions that are based around a short-term outcome, believing completely that they can tidy it up afterwards. And we've seen plenty of history of that. We've seen plenty of confidence on the part of the Fed. We saw Janet Yellen last week say she regretted using the word transitory.